Life was simple. Quiet mornings, a hot cup of coffee on the porch, and the steady hum of my little world moving along. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't causing trouble. Honestly, the biggest excitement on most days was watching squirrels chase each other across the yard. That was exactly how I liked it. A few months back, I bought a tractor. Nothing fancy. Just a sturdy old thing to help around the property. Moving dirt, clearing fallen branches, that sort of stuff. It wasn't even brand new. A little rusty, a little noisy, but reliable. I love that tractor. It made my work easier, and in a weird way, it became part of my daily routine. Parked it neatly on my driveway, off to the side, where it wasn't blocking anything. At first, nobody said a word. A few neighbors even waved when they passed by. One guy even joked that he wished he had one too. It felt good, like we were all just minding our business, living life the best we could. Then the letter showed up, a white envelope tucked into my mailbox. No stamp, no handwriting. Just printed words, cold and stiff. Notice of violation, it said in bold letters at the top. Apparently, my tractor was an eyesore and in violation of community standards. It had to be moved immediately or there would be further action. I read it twice, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they meant someone else's house. There were no clear rules against owning a tractor. I had checked when I bought the place. Plenty of other people had trailers, boats, even old campers sitting out front. But somehow, my tractor was a problem. Confused, I called the HOA office. Got the voicemail. Left a message. No reply. Days passed. Another letter came, this time printed in angry red ink. Final warning. Move it or face towing and fines. It didn't make any sense. Why target me? Why now? I talked to a couple of neighbors. One of them shrugged and said the HOA president had gotten serious lately about making the neighborhood look more upscale. Another neighbor told me the president didn't like anything that looked country sitting out front. So that was it. My tractor didn't fit their little picture-perfect idea of the neighborhood. Never mind that it wasn't hurting anyone. Never mind that I had lived there peacefully for years. I thought about moving it around back, but my backyard was fenced in with no access for vehicles. I thought about renting space elsewhere. But why should I have to spend money just because someone thought my tractor wasn't pretty enough? I decided to leave it where it was. Maybe that wasn't the smartest choice. Maybe I should have caved, avoided the drama. But it was my home, my driveway, my property. And frankly, I was tired of people thinking they could bully others just because they had a title or a clipboard. A week went by without anything happening. I started to think maybe they had backed off. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Saturday. I woke up early like usual, planning to get some yard work done. Poured myself a coffee, pulled on my boots, and headed outside. That's when I noticed it. The empty spot where my tractor had been. For a second, I just stood there, blinking at the bare concrete. I looked left, looked right, thinking maybe someone had moved it for some reason. But no, it was gone. Completely gone. My heart started pounding. I felt this rush of panic, anger, confusion all mixed together. Who just takes someone's tractor in the middle of the night? I ran back inside, grabbed my phone, and started calling around. The police said they didn't have any record of towing it. No accidents reported. No impound notices. They suggested I call the HOA. Of course. When I got someone on the line at the HOA office, they sounded almost smug, like they had been waiting for me to call. They confirmed it. They had arranged for the removal of the tractor because it was non-compliant. No court order. No proper notice beyond those 2 stupid letters. Just a quiet decision made behind closed doors. I asked where my tractor was. They gave me the name of some private towing company 2 towns over. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I wasn't sure if it was from anger or adrenaline. Maybe both. I grabbed my keys, jumped in my truck, and took off. It took almost an hour to get there. A dusty lot, filled with broken-down cars and rusty chain-link fences. There, sitting near the back, was my tractor, scratched, dented, one of the side mirrors busted clean off. I almost lost it right there. The towing guy didn't care. Said he was just following orders. If I wanted my tractor back, I had to pay the towing and storage fees. Nearly $400. I stared at him. $400 to get back my own tractor that they had no right to take in the first place. It felt like a punch in the gut. I could almost hear the HOA president's smug voice in my head, telling herself she had won, driving home with the tractor strapped behind me. I couldn't stop shaking. Anger, helplessness, disbelief. It all boiled together inside me. I didn't deserve this. I didn't start it. I had followed the rules, or at least the ones they had written down. Yet here I was, out $400 and a damaged tractor, because somebody decided they didn't like the way it looked. I pulled into my driveway, parked the trailer, and just sat there in the cab for a long time, staring out at the quiet, sunny street, watching the cars go by, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. That's when the idea hit me. A slow, sharp smile crept across my face. If the HOA thought my tractor was an eyesore before, they hadn't seen anything yet. The next morning, the sun came up bright and hot. I barely slept the night before. My mind kept spinning, thinking about everything that happened. I kept seeing my tractor sitting there, battered and forgotten, in that junkyard. I kept hearing that cold voice on the phone, telling me they were just enforcing the rules. Rules. Funny how rules always seem to favor the ones who make them. But this time, I wasn't just rollover. Not after what they did. Not after how they treated me. They picked the wrong person to push around. I got up early and made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the clock tick. Part of me wondered if I was about to make a huge mistake. Part of me didn't care anymore. Sometimes, when people keep poking you, you have no choice but to poke back harder. By 8 o'clock, I had a plan. Simple, clean, no yelling, no fighting. Just a little reminder that actions have consequences. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my keys, and walked outside. The street was already starting to buzz. Joggers passing by. Neighbors watering their lawns. Sprinklers clicking back and forth like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I climbed into my old tractor. The seat creaked under my weight. The engine groaned when I fired it up, but it came to life just like it always did. Tough old machine. Took a beating and kept running. I steered carefully down the driveway. Slowly, deliberately. People stared as I passed by. Some curious. Some confused. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just kept going. The main gate wasn't far. Our little neighborhood had a fancy electronic gate at the entrance, supposed to make the place feel exclusive, secure. Honestly, it was more for show than anything else. But today, that gate was going to be the star of the story. I pulled up right in front of it, took my time lining up, turned the tractor sideways, nice and wide, so nobody could squeeze past. Then I killed the engine and climbed down. The first car pulled up within minutes. A shiny black SUV. It rolled to a stop, the driver leaning out the window with a confused look on his face. I could see him talking, waving his arms, pointing at the gate. I didn't move. I just sat down on a little folding chair I had brought with me, opened a second coffee from my thermos, sipped it slowly, watched the show begin. More cars started arriving. A white sedan, a red pickup, a minivan full of kids heading to soccer practice. They all lined up behind the SUV, horns starting to honk. The driver of the SUV finally got out, walked over, trying to look tough. "Hey, man, you're blocking the gate," he said, his voice tight with frustration. I nodded, took another sip of coffee, said nothing. He blinked at me, looked at the tractor, looked at the line of cars growing behind him. He opened his mouth to say something else, but stopped himself. Maybe he saw the look on my face. Maybe he realized I wasn't in the mood. He stomped back to his car, slamming the door harder than necessary. Within 20 minutes, the place was chaos. More than a dozen cars now, snaking back down the street. People getting out, yelling, pacing. A few on their phones, probably calling the HOA, maybe even the police. I sat there calm as could be, like a fisherman waiting for a bite. Finally, I saw her, the HOA president herself, power walking up the sidewalk in her pressed khakis and crisp polo shirt, clipboard clutched under one arm, phone in the other. She looked furious, red in the face, hair bouncing with every angry step. She marched right up to me, voice sharp and loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "You need to move this thing immediately. You are blocking access to the entire community." I looked up at her, blinked once, took another slow sip of coffee. "This your community?" I asked, voice casual. She sputtered. "This is everyone's community, and you are violating numerous codes right now. I demand you move this machine at once." I nodded thoughtfully, set my coffee down, stood up slowly, looked her right in the eyes. "You mean kind of like how you violated my property rights by towing my tractor without permission?" Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. For a moment, she looked like a fish gasping for air. We had the authority," she stammered. "You were in violation." "No," I said, cutting her off. "I read the rules. There's nothing in there about tractors. And even if there was, you didn't follow the right process. No hearing, no warning meeting. Just 2 letters, and then you stole my property." She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. A few neighbors had gathered nearby, phones out, recording. Nobody was coming to save her. I smiled a little, not a friendly smile. "So," I said, voice still calm, "I figure the HOA can take my property without asking. I can return a favor for a few hours." "You're causing a major disturbance," she said, trying to sound official. "So did you," I said. She opened her mouth again, then thought better of it. Cars kept honking. People kept yelling. I could see the stress lines deepening on her face. Finally, she pulled out her phone again, dialed a number. I heard her hiss into the phone, "Get someone down here now." I leaned back in my chair and enjoyed the morning breeze. It took about 15 more minutes before a police cruiser rolled up. 2 officers climbed out, sunglasses glinting in the sun. They walked over, casual, not in any big hurry. The HOA president practically ran to meet them, talking fast, waving her arms. The officers listened politely, nodded, then made their way over to me. "Morning," one said. "Mind telling us what's going on?" I shrugged. "Just parked my tractor." The other officer grinned a little. "Looks that way." They asked for my ID. I handed it over without fuss. They ran it through their little handheld device, handed it back. "So," the first officer said, "the HOA says you're blocking access to the community." "Looks like it," I said. "Any particular reason?" I explained the situation, short and simple. How they had towed my tractor illegally, how they damaged it, how I tried to handle it the right way, but nobody cared until now. The officers listened carefully. When I finished, they exchanged a look. One of them leaned in a little and said quietly, "Technically, this is a civil matter, not a criminal one. We're not here to pick sides." I nodded. "Understood." He straightened up, loud enough for the crowd to hear. He said, "As long as there's no immediate danger, we can't force him to move it. You'll need to take it up at the courts if you want to press the issue." The HOA president looked like she was about to explode. Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't even know was possible. The officers tipped their hats and walked back to their cruiser. I sat back down, took another sip of coffee, and watched the morning continue to unravel around me. The HOA president stormed off, barking into her phone again. People kept honking. Kids whined in the back seats of overheated cars. A delivery guy sat on his scooter, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And through it all, I stayed calm, because for the first time in weeks, it felt like things were finally starting to even out. The longer I sat there, the more the scene turned into a full-blown circus. Cars stretched all the way down the street now. Some people had gotten out and were pacing up and down the sidewalks, muttering into their phones. A few kids were sitting on the curb, kicking pebbles and looking miserable. An old lady with a bag of groceries was stuck at the edge of the gate, fanning herself with a newspaper and shooting daggers at everyone around her. And right in the center of it all was me, sitting calmly in my folding chair, watching the storm swirl around my little island of peace. At one point, a young guy in a delivery uniform tried to get clever. He climbed over the gate, tossing his backpack over first, tried to squeeze through a gap between the fence and the hedges. Didn't work. He got stuck halfway, arms flailing, legs kicking. Took 3 people to pull him free. They left a huge hole in the hedge, dirt flying everywhere. Couldn't have asked for better symbolism, honestly. After about an hour, people started realizing that honking wasn't going to make me move, that yelling wasn't going to shame me into backing down. Slowly, they started to change tactics. A woman in a shiny red sports car walked up to me with a smile that looked like it hurt her face. "Hi there," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "Maybe we can work something out? You know, for the sake of the kids." She gestured back at a minivan where 2 little girls sat glumly, playing with iPads. I smiled right back at her. A big, polite, empty smile. "I'm sure they'll be just fine," I said, sipping my coffee. Her smile cracked for a second. Then she turned on her heel and stomped back to her car. Next came the bribes. One guy offered me $50 to move the tractor for just 10 minutes so he could squeeze through. Another guy offered $100. Someone else tried to tempt me with a box of donuts from the bakery down the road. I'll admit, the donuts almost got me. It had been a long morning, and my stomach was starting to growl. But I stayed firm. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about revenge anymore. It was about standing my ground. It was about showing them, all of them, that sometimes the little guy gets fed up and pushes back. Around lunchtime, the real panic started to set in. The mail truck couldn't get through. Delivery vans were stuck outside, packages piling up. A moving truck trying to bring furniture into the neighborhood had to back down the street, blocking half the main road for miles. People were late for work, late for appointments, missing soccer practice, book clubs, lunch dates. The HOA president had disappeared for a while, probably holed up somewhere plotting her next move. When she finally reappeared, she had reinforcement with her, a couple more board members in tow, their faces pinched and stressed. They huddled together near the entrance, whispering furiously. Every now and then, they would glance over at me, like maybe I would get tired, give up, move on. They had no idea how stubborn I could be. Finally, the HOA president broke away from the group and came striding toward me again. This time, her tone was different. Less barking, more begging. "Look," she said, her voice tight. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point." I raised an eyebrow, took another sip of coffee, waited. "We can discuss the matter of your tractor," she said, forcing the words out like they physically hurt her. "Maybe come to some sort of agreement." "An agreement?" I said slowly, like I didn't understand. "Yes," she said, clearly trying not to scream. "You move the tractor. We sit down, review the rules together, maybe work something out." I let the words hang in the air for a long moment. Neighbors were watching now, phones still recording. Some were even nodding, like they wanted to cheer but didn't quite dare. I stood up slowly, stretched my back, walked over the tractor and ran my hand along the side, feeling the rough metal under my fingertips. For a second, I thought about dragging it out even longer, making them really sweat. But then I saw the little kids in the minivan, sweaty and tired and bored out of their minds. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. So I nodded once, short and sharp. "I'll move it," I said. The HOA president visibly sagged with relief. "But," I added, holding up a finger, "we're having that meeting today, not next week, not someday. Today." She opened her mouth to argue, then shut it again, nodded stiffly. "Fair enough." I climbed back onto the tractor, fired up the engine, and slowly backed out of the way. People cheered, literally cheered, like I had just saved them from a sinking ship. Some waved, some honked their horns in approval. Even the grumpy guy in the pickup gave me a thumbs up. It felt good, really good. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The HOA president scurried off to make arrangements. Apparently, there was some kind of emergency meeting protocol they can invoke for urgent disputes. Within an hour, we were all packed into the little community clubhouse, a stuffy room with bad lighting and even worse chairs. I sat near the front, arms crossed, eyes steady. The board members sat behind a folding table, shuffling papers, whispering back and forth. When they finally called a meeting to order, the HOA president cleared her throat and launched into a speech about community standards and harmonious living, and other buzzwords that didn't mean much to anyone except the people who wrote them. I let her talk, let her drone on, let her dig the hole deeper. Then, when it was my turn, I stood up. No microphone, no fancy speech, just plain, simple truth. I told them exactly what had happened, how they towed my tractor without real cause, how they damaged it, how they ignored my calls, my questions, my rights. I held up copies of the HOA rules, the ones that didn't mention anything about tractors. I read out loud the parts about due process and member rights they had conveniently forgotten, and I did it all in a calm, steady voice. No yelling, no threats, just facts. The room was dead silent when I finished. Even the board members looked uncomfortable. The HOA president tried to push back, of course, tried to spin it, but it was too late. The damage was done. People had seen what they had done, seen how they had handled it, and they weren't impressed. One by one, neighbors started speaking up, people I barely knew, people I thought didn't care. They talked about other petty fines, other stupid rules, how the HOA had become less about helping the community and more about controlling it. It was like a dam broke. I sat back and watched it happen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The meeting didn't end quickly. It dragged on for hours. The board members kept trying to claw back control, but it was like trying to hold water in your hands. Once people started talking, really talking, there was no stopping it. Stories poured out like rain. One woman stood up and told everyone how the HOA fined her for having a bird feeder in her yard, saying it was attracting pests. Another guy, a soft-spoken older man, talked about how they threatened him over his mailbox being the wrong shade of beige. Beige of all things. And the more people shared, the angrier the room became. Not yelling, angry. Not wild, chaotic angry. The quiet, simmering kind of anger. The kind that burns low and steady and doesn't go out easily. I sat there listening, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was proud. Proud that standing my ground had somehow cracked open something bigger. But another part of me was sad. Sad that it had to come to this. That people had been walking around for years, carrying so much frustration just under the surface. It didn't have to be this way. The HOA president tried to regain control. She kept tapping her clipboard against the table, kept raising her voice, kept tossing around fancy words like governance and compliance. But every time she spoke, it just made things worse. She sounded out of touch. Desperate. People weren't scared anymore. Finally, someone in the back, a woman with a baby on her hip, shouted, "We want to vote." At first, nobody moved. The board members froze, their eyes darting around the room like trapped animals. But then another voice echoed the call. And another. A low chant started to build. Vote, vote, vote. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew. It grew until the walls seemed to hum with it. I looked over and saw the HOA president's hands shaking as she tried to shuffle her papers. She dropped her pen. It rolled across the table and fell onto the floor with a tiny, sharp clatter. And somehow, that small sound felt like the end of something. The bylaws were clear. If enough members demanded a special vote, the board had to allow it. Right there, right then, reluctantly, bitterly, the board announced that a recall vote would happen immediately. Ballots were passed around. Cheap paper ballots printed from a dusty old office printer. People crowded into corners, onto benches, onto the floor. Some filled out their ballots on the backs of their kids' coloring books. Nobody left. Nobody hesitated. The air buzzed with strange kind of excitement. Nervous, hopeful, electric. When it was time to collect the ballots, they piled them into an old cardboard box someone found in the storage closet. A few volunteers, trusted neighbors. Counted them right there in full view of everyone. And when the final tally was announced, a roar went up. The board was out. Every single one of them. Gone. Just like that. People hugged. People cried. Someone popped open a can of soda and sprayed it into the air like champagne. And there, standing at the edge of it all, I felt this deep, overwhelming wave of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The neighborhood didn't magically fix itself overnight. We still had work to do. We still had rules to rethink. We still had new board members to elect. Real people this time. People who cared more about the community than about the color of someone's mailbox. But in that moment, standing in the middle of a messy, noisy, joyful crowd, it felt like we had finally turned a corner. It felt like people were seeing each other again. Later that night, I sat on my porch, watching the stars come out. The tractor sat in the driveway, a little banged up, but still standing strong. I ran my hand along the fender, feeling the scrapes and dents. Battle scars. A soft knock broke the quiet. I looked up and saw my next-door neighbor standing there, a six-pack of cold beer in his hand. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a bottle and sat down next to me on the porch steps. For a long time, we didn't talk. We just sat there, sipping beer, watching the fireflies blink across the lawn. Finally, he said, I think you scared him worse than a hurricane." I chuckled. Maybe I did. We talked late into the night about tractors and kids and barbecue recipes and bad country songs. About how stupid it was to fight over grass heights and fence colors when there were real things to care about. For the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a community. The next morning, when the sun came up, there was a strange new feeling in the air. People waved when they passed by. Kids rode their bikes up and down the street without getting dirty looks from the HOA patrol. A woman I barely knew dropped off a pie with a handwritten note that simply said, "Thanks for standing up." The tractor stayed right where it was, big, old, stubborn. A quiet reminder that sometimes it only takes one person to change everything. It didn't happen because I yelled the loudest. It didn't happen because I had the most money or the biggest house or the fanciest lawyer. It happened because I refused to be pushed around. Because when they told me to sit down, I stood up. When they told me to shut up, I spoke louder. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look neat or polite or easy. Sometimes it looks like an old, dusty tractor blocking the main gate on a hot morning. Sometimes it looks like a neighborhood waking up after years of being asleep. And sometimes, it looks like hope. The kind you can't buy. The kind you can't fake. The kind that sticks. The kind that makes you believe again. In yourself, in your neighbors, in the stubborn, messy, beautiful idea of a real community. Not because someone told you to. Not because it was easy. But because you decided it was worth fighting for. And once you see that, once you feel it deep down in your bones, you never let it go again. Not for anyone. Not for anything.